My name's Laura and I care for my 14-year-old son Christian. Christian's been diagnosed with autism. We found with Christian that he wasn't speaking at the age of 2 and we were very concerned. He doesn't speak much now at all. My average day as a carer is just go from the morning. When Christian gets up at 5 a.m, I'm up with him just to supervise and make sure everything's okay and that he's safe. There's no 2 days for me that are the same. There's no minute that it's the same. It could change from being happy to an absolute volcano eruption. But we try to keep him as happy and content as he can be and explain to him how his day will look. With Christian, he will communicate to us through either putting on some music and making us interact with him, or playing the piano and asking us to sing with him by making us stand next to him, and we just all come together as a family.
My name is Isaiah and I care for my brother Christian. Having a connection with my brother is very special. With music, I play the piano and he sings.
In the early days when people would stare at me, for instance in the supermarket when Christian was having a little tantrum or whatever he was having, I found it really upsetting and it really made me feel uncomfortable. So just offering your help or saying, is everything okay, has such an impact on one's life when they're having that moment with their child.
I wrote a song called My Brother that was for Christian, and I wrote it because I wanted to express out all my feelings and show everyone that how I feel about having a brother with autism. You're so affectionate and no one can change that. You are loving and kind to everyone around you. When you smile, it makes me so happy. When I get angry, remember I will always love you. I love you.
Moonee Valley City Council engaged Kids Own Publishing to make this book with children of the Avondale Heights Preschool. They have been walking, talking, looking, listening, and we've been making art with Verity, our artist. All of that content is gathered then and put into a book.
The reactions from the children for this project have been really warm and responsive. They have been so excited about being involved in the project.
And the most exciting thing about the book that is made by the children for the children of Moonee Valley is that we are going to be able to deliver this book to each one of our education and care services in Moonee Valley.
This year we're celebrating 50 years of library service within Moonee Valley. And whilst we have 5 wonderful public libraries, we're always looking to make books more accessible to the community. We're building little libraries across the city, sponsored by Moonee Valley Libraries, which provide easy access to books for readers of all ages and backgrounds. We want to encourage a love of reading and lifelong learning within our community.
Not only do these little libraries support literacy for people of all ages, but they also foster a sense of community and they encourage an idea about recycling. The Aberfeldy Men's Shed have taken on this project of building these wonderful little book houses, and they've done an amazing job utilising recycled materials wherever they can. The Moonee Valley Libraries are really happy to support a project like this, which has community, sustainability and literacy at its heart.
I think it's better to walk to school because we can get out, do some physical activity, look at the environment.
So what I like about walking to school is that you get energised and you can talk to all your friends.
I feel awake from the fresh air and I'm not as tired and I'm ready to go to school.
What makes walking to school really fun is that you can do it with mates and interact with other people, and you can find out things about other people that you don't know already.
After walking, I feel healthy and fresh and ready for the day.
I think that walking to school is fun because, especially now with all the active paths, I think that because the whole school's involved, you can walk with your friends and teachers sometimes.
A warm welcome to the members of the Public Gallery who have joined us tonight at the Civic Centre, as well as those watching from home on the internet. Thank you very much for joining us. As well as being live streamed, the recording of this meeting will also be available on our website, so attendees in the gallery are advised that their presence may be recorded. I also ask that mobile phones please be switched to silent mode during the meeting. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which Moonee Valley is located, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. We also extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Councillors, I have received apologies for tonight's meeting from Councillor Serace and Councillor Lawrence. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the apologies be accepted? Councillor Gatchimarichi. And seconded, Councillor Byrne. Happy for me to put that to the vote? Yep. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, thank you. Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall and Councillor Sypek have also sought leave of absence. Councillors, can I please have a mover and seconder that Councillor Nation be granted leave of absence from 1st of December 2018 to 21st of December 2018, that Councillor Marshall be granted leave of absence from 4th of December 2018 to 21st of December 2018, and that Councillor Sypek be granted leave of absence from 8th of December 2018 to 25th of December 2018. Councillor Gatchimarici, seconder. Councillor Cusack. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday 13th of November 2018 be confirmed? Councillor Nation, seconded. Councillor Sypek. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening, please? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to declare a conflict of interest in item 10.7 on tonight's an indirect conflict of interest due to conflicting duties. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor have a conflict of interest? No. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? I don't believe that we do. Councillors, we have received one petition to be tabled tonight, signed by 196 residents. Am I supposed to read this? By 196 residents of Essendon, petitioning that the proposal for a TPG mobile phone base station to be located adjacent to 39 Glass Street, Essendon, instead be located in a wide area away from homes. Do I have a motion for that, please? Councillor Gatchimarici.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to move that the petition be received and noted, that the petition be referred to the Director of Planning and Environment for investigation and reporting back to Council, and that the petitioners be advised accordingly.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Marshall. Would you like to speak to that motion, Councillor Gatchimarici? Not normally. No. All right, I'll put that to the vote. Did you want to speak? Would you want to speak?
Only briefly, sorry, I wasn't sure if we would speak to petitions or not. Just that we have had a large amount of feedback since Councillor Marshall's notice of motion in October. And this is one certainly that I have had a large number of phone calls about in Essendon. So I'm pleased to see that the residents have tried to contact TPG and the members of Parliament and Council to make a good point about where it should be. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, do you want to speak?
Look, only to say that this goes to the point identified in the report by council officers around that cumulative impact and the lack of oversight around the cumulative impact of all these various proposals. And I think certainly was pleased to see the MAV, the motion to the MAV get up, and we'll note that the advocacy that they'll be doing, but it is really important that we keep the pressure up because someone needs to be having carriage and oversight of this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. I'll now ask our CEO, Brian Lancaster, whether we have received any public questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, we don't have any questions from the public tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lancaster. And we don't have any reports from special committees. So I shall move on to our first report, which is 10.1. And it relates to a planning application at 15 Talbot Road, Strathmore. So, councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gatchimarici.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
I have a seconder for that motion. Councillor Sypek, thank you. Councillor Gatchimarici, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. This is a development which Councillors Lawrence, Sharp and I attended at the start of the year, and it was a very big consultation. It was held at the Clock Tower because there were quite a few objections, and the key objection at the time related to the number of units on the block, the impacts associated with that, and the height. And I went back through my notes before tonight, and the consistent theme from everyone at that consultation was that they just wanted less units on the block and a reduction in height. So this proposal still has some flaws. No one is suggesting it is perfect, but it is reducing the number of dwellings, it reduces the height, it now addresses the parking requirements, and importantly it responds to the fact that that patch is really a family area and these are now family-sized homes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gatchie-Murchie. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Gatchie-Murchie covered all the points.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Would you like to close, councillor? No? Okay, I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So our next report is at 10.2 and it is the 2018 to 2019 Capital Works Program update. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sypek?
Yes, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with a slight amendment. Adopt the placing name civil right. Wrong one. Add to the 2018-19 Capital Works Program Variation Section A1 of the Appendix A the resurfacing of Bowes Avenue netball courts to the value of $80,000. Note at least one of the resurfaced courts at Bowes Avenue is to be multi-line to facilitate other sports for social use, and the courts are to be open on the Bowes Avenue side to ensure community access. Authorised requested 2018-19 Capital Works project variation as per section A1 of Appendix A, and note year-to-date program savings through the completed withdrawn projects as per section A2 and A3 of Appendix A. That partly offsets additional funds requested to this date.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Byrne? Thank you. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We've got a very comprehensive capital works program, and I think we've last year did quite a lot of work with a lot of pavilions that we finished, and we're going to be finishing some more in the very near future, probably before Christmas and some after Christmas. So I think everyone knows what our capital works program has been over the last 12 to 24 months, so happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just, point of clarification, are we moving the officer's recommendation or the amendment?
The amendment.
With the amendment.
Okay.
With the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is a great report for everyone who wants to have a look at what we're doing around the municipality. It obviously comes in quite regularly when we speak about capital works. Basically, at the end of October, we've spent $48 million, or 73% of the capital works program is completed under instruction or in the procurement phase, which is great. And also we've received $5.5 million worth of grants. We've spoken about them before in the chamber as well. In terms of Councillor Sypek's amendment, in terms of putting the Bowes Avenue netball courts in, it's obviously been quite contentious, but at the end of the day, the netball courts at the moment aren't safe. We don't have enough netball courts as it is, and we need to make sure they're functional so that St Christopher's Airport West have somewhere to train. The idea to make them multi-lined, whilst we don't necessarily know what multi-lined they will be yet, the idea to have them as social open access courts so that people can use them when they're not being booked out for team or club use is something that we're working towards through our pavilions and through our sporting fields. as most people would know, there's seasonal allocations for football clubs, and when the football teams have them, they obviously have exclusive use even though they've got them for the season, but when they're not using them, people go down, kick the football. We want to make sure that our courts are in the same sort of a standard, so that's the idea behind that. It's really exciting, and it's good to see that Airport West are getting a bit of improvement, and I'm looking forward to the master plan for Bowes Avenue coming in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Marshall?
Obviously, we go through a very extensive process to develop our budget, but things crop up. And this is a summary of matters which have cropped up and which need to be attended to via this variation process. Just noting a couple of matters in Moonee. There are irrigation works in Rothwell Park proposed, and obviously some car park upgrade design works down at Fairbairn. And also Flemington Community Centre, the proposal for CCTV system installation, and it's primarily as a staff safety matter, which I think is important. There is a variation in the sense that Princess Street improvements which were proposed didn't get sufficient community support to proceed, and so they won't be going ahead at this stage in time.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak on that item? Councillor Cusack?
Just very briefly, Mayor, to say that the enormity of the work that's actually going through this council is something that needs to be appreciated. We haven't, as a council, done this much work and shifted this much activity ever. And that over the last couple of years, we've recognised the need to address a whole lot of shortfalls in our capital works area, not because they're shortfalls that are bad ones, but it's about obviously the process of renewal. It's about obviously spending a penny now, and so that you don't have to spend a pound later. And so I just want to acknowledge in this the amount of effort that is being made by the officers to get this stuff through, because no project is a simple project. They all demand considerable expertise and a lot of oversight, and the reality is now that we're seeing across all of our municipality some really excellent examples of both innovative and new ways of doing things. I think that's got to be taken into account.
Definitely. Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Would you like to close, Councillor Soper?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do reiterate what Councillor Cusack said. The officers have done a great job over the last 12 months, delivering some on time, some before time, and we've still got some that are coming through that are way ahead of schedule. And there hasn't been too many faults with it, and I must commend the officers on doing such a great job with the capital works this year. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. So I'll put that to the vote, and it is the proposed motion that is up on our screen, which Councillor Sypek read out. So I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So the next report on tonight's agenda relates to the place naming and civic recognition policy. Councillors, do I have a motion, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Happy to move an alternative.
Yes.
And you want me to read it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. Adopt the placing name and civil rights, civil recognition policy separately circulated, which the following amendment, clause 7.4. All decisions in relation to being a place name proposal, civil or commemorative naming will be determined by a resolution of council or a special committee of council. Request council officers to prepare a report for the 11th of December 2018 ordinary meeting of council that establish a special committee of council's entered place naming and civil recognition committee in accordance with Section 86 of the Local Government Act 1989, and stipulate that the members of the special committee comprises of 3 councillors, 1 representative from each ward, with the mayor and deputy mayor being the representatives for their ward.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconder for that motion?
Mayor, can I just ask for clarification. So is this intended to be, through you, every single decision in relation to the place naming? I'm just not clear as the scope.
Do you want me to explain it? Or?
Yeah, and sorry, I'll give you the second point too that I was hoping to get clarified. So if the mayor and deputy mayor they happen to be from the same ward,
then only the mayor will be the representative from that ward.
I can clarify to some degree that there will be a report. Well, the report brought to us on the 11th of December will stipulate all that.
Yep.
But the intention was to set this up similar to the land acquisition committee that we've got, rather than bring these decisions to full council, have a committee deciding on it.
So can we perhaps then have a bit more flexibility in relation to B, just that the report might bring back a recommendation, just so we don't have that potential issue with the mayor and deputy mayor if they are in the same ward? I'm assuming this is going to be something that will go on.
Yeah. No, totally.
So just if we take out from the words from one representative from each ward and stop it there, and then maybe the report, we can give further thought to this.
Yeah,
Are you happy with that, Councillor Sophie?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then, yeah, the report might say, doesn't make sense otherwise. It doesn't make sense.
Do I have a seconder for that?
Yeah, I'm happy to second it with the deletion of that last bit so it makes sense. Yep.
Councillor Marshall, seconding. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the...
Yeah, look, I think the report speaks for itself, that a report will be coming back, so happy to just move the alteration for the report to be brought back.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. We're just tidying up this point B.
Sure.
Yeah, one representative from each ward.
Thank you, perfect. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to this item?
Look, happy to certainly look at getting a report back, and it might reduce what has at times probably been ambiguity in relation to how these decisions are made. So certainly we look forward to the report and think it's important that we do have one representative from each ward, because that knowledge, that sense that you'll have at least someone from a ward who might have particular knowledge about a request, I think that's really important. So happy to support that, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Nation?
I will, and I just would appreciate if we can clarify if we're actually adopting the policy, because that's what's outlined at the top of that motion, but then a report's coming back in regards to the procedure, because the policy actually under 7.3 and 7.4 outlines the actual procedure that takes place. So it seems odd that we're adopting a policy and then a report's coming back in terms of the procedure, because with the adoption of the policy, the procedure's outlined in it. So I'm just a little bit confused what we are doing.
I might flag...
So then, can we have consequential amendments to reflect?
Just trying to establish how we can firstly answer Councillor Nation's question, I guess. Mrs. Watt, would you be able to give an explanation as to Councillor Nation's question, please?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. The recommendation to Council tonight recommends that the place naming policy be adopted. Included in that policy is a clause which says that place naming decisions will be made by Council or a special committee. So we're proposing that tonight the Council adopts the policy, and will bring a further report back in December about the establishment of a special committee under Section 86 to make the decisions in relation to those place names.
Thank you, Ms. Watt. Does that answer your question, Councillor Nation?
To an extent, it's probably not how I read that point, 7.4 being a decision of council and not a decision of a special committee of council. on page 43 or page 7 of 14 of the actual policy. Look, as long as we're not adopting an inconsistency.
Would you like further clarification, or are you happy with that?
Clarification on that is what? Where's the reference to the committee? I couldn't find it either in the policy.
I'm just reading what's in the first part of the recommendation.
In the policy itself, the decision making is through a resolution of council.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't say anything about a committee though.
It says a resolution of council or a special committee.
Not the
in the proposed motion, which is what the proposed motion is adopting. So the proposed motion is allowing us to either determine by resolution by council or by a special committee of council, but we're going to receive a further report regarding the special committee of council.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if council prefers, we can defer this item and bring the policy and the process for making those decisions back to council in December.
I do understand there are a couple of naming issues on track at the moment, though, and I'm quite conscious of the fact that delaying it may cause issues, but happy to take input on board, obviously. If councils are in mind to do that, prefer to do that.
Can we perhaps, Mayor, as a point of clarification, add an additional point to this, which says the report could also suggest if there are any inconsistencies with the policy. So if there are any additional amendments that need to be made to the policy to make sure it's clean.
So
if we add a point C, so that indicates if there are any inconsistencies in the policy that need to be rectified.
Especially if it's referenced in other points.
So they'll come back to us on the 11th of December.
Yep. So that'll provide the opportunity to do the review. So just a C, a point C.
So, the council, what was your wording, Councillor Marshall? That council
request prepare a report that identifies. So this is a C. Don't you hate it when the numbering won't work? So we can get rid of the dash. So it just says identifies any inconsistencies in the policy. To be amended or rectified. In light of the process proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Are you happy with that amendment, Councillor Sypy? Okay.
Is that a yes? We don't want to have an inconsistent policy, do we?
Okay. Would any other councillor wish to speak to that item?
It's a formal amendment.
No, haven't taken it as a formal amendment.
Ryan just nodded.
Haven't taken it as a formal. I've got the received the okay from the mover that the additional point is fine, and it is really just a procedural point. So I'm happy with that. If no other councillor wishes to speak, I'll just put that to the vote.
Can I close?
Not if there's no opposition. I don't believe there's any opposition. So if we can put that to the vote, that I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. The next report is 10.4, which is the response to notice of motion 2018-17 commercial car hire. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation with 1 to 5 as per the recommendation in the report, with the addition of a point 6, which reads, bring back a report with an update within 12 months, following the monitoring as at point 3 of this recommendation. Sorry, that should read, bring back a report to council. And then 7, at the time of the update report coming back to council, include a review of the Moonee Valley City Council Municipal Parking Permit Policy 2013, last modified 13 June 2017, which considers modifying the permissible uses of permits to preclude permit uses in cases where the vehicle is being used for car sharing. And just to be clear, Mayor, that is in relation to not the specified permits that we have for commercial car sharing, but the individual
residential permits.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. The notice of motion that was the origin of this report came out of some concerns that have been expressed to me by residents, and I know some other councillors that also had concerns expressed about individuals using their vehicles, so their personal vehicles, through various car sharing platforms. And particularly in our part of the world where parking is at a premium and there is nothing that causes neighbourhood disputes other than fences around, other than those issues of parking and people feeling that they're being deprived of their ability to park. So had people raising concerns and saying, well, what is council doing to look at this issue? And I suppose I was particularly concerned that we'd had the O-bike situation that had arisen very quickly, and we'd had to be reactive about that because I don't think anyone had anticipated it would go as it did. And for me, this was about trying to be on the front foot with this particular issue and actually turning our mind to what is a very difficult issue, and I acknowledge that. There's no easy solutions, and I thank the officers for preparing a detailed report which has really canvassed a whole range of concerns and a whole range of things we need to look at in terms of parking and the way that we manage parking and vehicle usage in Moonee Valley. I think continuing to discuss or having those discussions with other stakeholders at state and other councils is really important because, again, these are things best dealt with rather than on a municipality by municipality basis, but a statewide basis. And I think that's a really prudent approach to take. I'm mindful that it's something that should be monitored, and I'm glad that that's built in with a report back to council, because sometimes these things, there can be a bit of a flash in the pan and they die off, sometimes they're not, and this is one that we do need to continue monitoring in light of the parking demands that we have. I think the potential issue around the permits is important because in the same way that people have concerns where residents are sharing or selling the right to use their permit on Parkhound or whatever it might be, I think in the same way where we've got individuals seeking to use their personal vehicle and in turn use their permit as part of that process, we really need to be on top of that, because this council has really, against the strongest of officer recommendation repeatedly, resisted the introduction of fees for all permits. And I know that no doubt people wish it was otherwise, but when we have people who might be abusing those permits, it makes it increasingly difficult to keep having that argument. So I think we need to look at how we make sure we regulate and don't allow our permits to be abused through these sorts of platforms. So I thank the officers again for the report, and one of the really important things in it is that we need to be continually looking at ways to reduce vehicle usage, and that is a very challenging thing to do. and it is a very difficult thing to do, but as a council we owe it to our community to try and reduce vehicle usage wherever possible and to make it safe to walk, to cycle, other transport modes. So I think, again, that needs to be a real focus, but we also need to make sure that people who are being opportunistic don't get to reap financial reward basically at the cost of everybody else and the amenity of people who live in particular areas.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak? No? Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Nation?
Thank you, Mayor, and I thank Councillor Marshall for bringing the original notice of motion to Council, and the actual content of the report is probably a little bit different to what I expected, and I know, as Councillor Marshall stated, the idea was to try to find a solution to a potential problem, but the report does also highlight that car share, peer-to-peer car share, might actually be beneficial for the municipality in terms of less car ownership and obviously less cars parked on our streets. I know the City of Moreland, as mentioned in the report, have gone to the other extreme where residents can actually apply for a permit to put their own car share vehicle at the front of their property. And there's obviously a lot of different ways that councils can approach peer-to-peer car share in particular, and I think it's really beneficial that we've got this level of research, even just the number of pages in the report that gives us and council a background of how we start to address potential problems. And as Councillor Marshall stated, they'll obviously be very different in different parts of the municipality. But I think it's very good that we've got this information in front of us, and very good that it's going to come back to us as well. And we do stay on top because, as Councillor Marshall stated, it's that one-way booking, the O-bike sort of model where you do end up with clutter on the streets, and that's what we need to avoid. Keeping in mind, ensuring that there is ultimately less reliance on vehicles in Moonee Valley, and the different ways and approaches we can go about doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Cusack?
Just briefly, Mayor, and a reflection in this is that we don't want to stop new initiatives, even though they might have some rough edges, so that we can continue to address, as both Councillor Marshall and Nation have pointed out, the overcrowding and the amount of cars on roads. And one area that comes very rapidly to mind is the potential where we have high and significantly dense developments, and the opportunity for this sort of project or this sort of sharing to be able to be done. And it might be something that, in terms of our community education campaign, to work back through developers and so on like that, or other players, real estate agents and the likes of that, who have influence in the area where there might be, some hundreds of apartments, and the capacity to look at that, especially where, unfortunately, we've been put into corners of having to waive the number of car parks around, for instance, and the likes of that again, when we know that many, many people will probably go off and buy a car just the same and hopefully get a park on our streets.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Next report is titled Councillor Expenses at 10.5. The report is from 1st July 2018 to 30th of September 2018. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sypek. Thank you. Thank you. Seconder, do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think it speaks for itself.
Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Just briefly, just noting that it's, we obviously do get an allowance as well, so people are potentially using their allowance for things that aren't in here, so it doesn't necessarily mean for the community who are reading the report that we're not doing development and training and conference and seminars and whatnot, that we could actually be using our allowance. But in saying that, those columns are looking rather dire. So, I think it's one of those things that we have to keep in mind, that the community expects us to be keeping up with our development and training, and there'll probably be things in those columns down the track.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? No. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 10.6 on the agenda relates to the proposed lease at Strathmore Tennis Club Incorporated over part of 44 Lomond Street, Strathmore. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gatchimerici, thank you.
I would like to move the officer's recommendation, please.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Gatchimerici?
Just very briefly to confirm that there is an existing lease, and this is just adding the additional courts in, and that when the lease is reviewed in the future, they will be combined into one lease, and the rates will be reviewed then as well. So,
thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor? Okay. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Van? Yep.
Just in addition to what Councillor Gatchimerici brought up in terms of reviewing leases, there's probably members of the community who are looking at some of these reports that are coming through and noticing the differences between all of the different sports and what we hire out for courts and fields and pitches and whatnot. So council is doing a lot of work in the background to ensure there's equality across a range of sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, 10.7 on the agenda is the update. Councillor Byrne has a conflict in 10.7.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, due to an indirect conflict due to conflicting duties. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 10.7 is the update on the response to Notice of Motion 2016-15 Sporting Club or Community Organisation leases. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Marshall?
Thank you. The genesis of this report, again, if I think way back when, was a series of discussions that myself and Councillor Cusack had with the Maribyrnong Park Bowls Club. And during those discussions, it became very clear that the capacity of organisations who might have land leases over facilities that are owned by council, the capacity of those organisations to actually do significant amounts of capital works was limited. And council traditionally has had two particular forms of use of these types of facilities. The land lease, where we've pretty much applied to the bowls and the tennis clubs, and that's where essentially that organisation is a tenant and has exclusive possession in relation to that particular facility. And the price of having that exclusive possession is that they have significant capital works and maintenance obligations in relation to the facility. Now, on one level, that sounds fine and that makes sense, but when you look at the membership of these organisations, often older people, people who might have limited ability to fundraise and to actually pay for those significant capital works, you start thinking, well, what happens at the end of this? because if someone doesn't have the capacity to pay, then your concern is always that council will be left at the end of the lease with a facility which is falling down. So to use a phrase of Councillor Cusack, it has opened Pandora's box of worms, because, and I suspected at the time it would. It's identified as part of this process something that Councillor Byrne referred to in the previous matter, which is significant inconsistencies and legacy arrangements in the way that various leases and licences have come into play. And council officers are going through, looking at each of those and working out what is equitable and what is fair, and that is really important. As part of this, we will be doing more work around the lease and licence policy, which I think is really important, again, to make sure that we've got consistency. But this council is also going to have some really difficult decisions to make around the support that we do give to other sports, because we've had the pavilions that are rebuilt at very enormous cost, and what we're shifting to is that allocation, on particular hours or whatever it might be for the sporting groups. But we're going to have a really serious think about the way that we deal with these land lease situations, and particularly, again, you look at some of the bowls clubs, and I think about Maribyrnong Park, the ability for people who might have disabilities to actually access these facilities can be so limited. And again, if you're putting the obligation back on a group that has a limited capacity to pay, you have to think, is that fair, and is it going to work out well in the end? And it's really interesting to me that so often you see in our council grant applications, these applications from tennis and bowls clubs to try and upgrade facilities, and it is very piecemeal. And that's why I think we need to have a strategy about how we support the organisations who have these facilities, whether the land lease is the appropriate form of contractual arrangement. So there's a lot of work to be done, and certainly the audits around condition, again, are very important, because we need to have a sense as a council, what sort of shape are these facilities in? Because we don't want to be left with facilities at the end of leases that are basically need to be pulled down. So I certainly thank the officers for what has been a significant amount of work to date, and there is still a significant amount of work to be done. I think it might be something that is, in some ways, a very difficult and time-consuming process to go through, but at the end of this process, we will have a significant amount of data and information which is incredibly useful to council, and ultimately too, I'd like to think that we have a system which reflects a much fairer and equitable system for the way that we deal with these facilities and the access of our community to these facilities in the long run.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak?
What can I say?
Would any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Cusack?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. It's an interesting thing that many of those land leases are many, many years old. So they were created in a day when people didn't anticipate the kind of growth that we have in our municipality now, nor do they anticipate the kind of change that was going to occur naturally, whether there is certain demand for a type of sport, whether the people who were enthusiasts for a particular activity all those years ago were able to actually sustain it and pass on the baton. And you see how that has changed, and bowls clubs are brought up as one of those, because many of those bowls clubs and the land leases that were done at the time were done with people who were in their 20s. But 50 years later, they're still 70, and they're still the same committee virtually that is negotiating and working with council. And you see that in places like Maribyrnong Park. I don't want to point the bone at them, but that's a reality. While other clubs, of course, are going through that process of rejuvenation and so on like that. And we have, obviously, those natural places in our community where many people have always subscribed to a particular sport and have no problem about participating at all sorts of levels and being very active. The ones that come to mind are obviously netball, cricket, footy, and so on like that, where the big demands are. But we've got those new and emerging demands around the world of soccer and the various rugby codes and the likes of that. So the next thing about that is flexibility, and as we go down the track of developing all this policy area, it's about getting the balance right, and so that people feel assured that they can continue on, maybe go through bad times but pop out of the other end, or logically make different arrangements or come to different types of thinking and say that's a better way to do it. And I think that we have clearly seen in our community the absolute need for more flexibility around our leases so that different people can participate in those facilities in different ways and share them in a logical and common sense way. And it's not about, people go into this thinking that it's always about, oh, you know, we'll have the footy club here and then they'll clear out by such and such a time, and, you know, another club of some sort or another organisation of some sort will come in and fill the hole. They're not all mutually exclusive. I mean, there will be people in one group who will be crossing over into another group. And in a sense, that's a great thing for Moonee Valley, because it's a broadening and opening up of all sorts of opportunities for all sorts of people, and that exposure across different things. And you see it where the smart clubs are actually having fundraisers to keep themselves going, and different other organisations in Moonee Valley are actually coming to their fundraisers now and participating in them because they're good fun to do. And that goes straight back to the whole of 2040 and what makes common sense out of our community and community connectedness and so on like that. So the relevance of this is very, very deep, and it's an important enabler ultimately to making things like 2040 work.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak? That item? Okay. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Just bring Councillor Byrne back in. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Okay, the next item is 10.8, and it is a proposed disposal of 27 Kitty Hawk Court in Airport West. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sypek. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Sypek?
Yes, Madam Mayor. It's a slight slither of land in Kitty Hawk Court that has been underutilised or hardly ever used by anyone, and we'll be disposing of the property.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This one's actually come through the chamber before, but it was quite a while ago, so the officers have brought it back. A couple of things to note is that we do need to spend $140,000 to get services to it. That will increase, hopefully, the price that we can get for this redundant land. Submissions will be open for the public, that they can put, you know, if they want to object, they can. It's, as Councillor Sypek said, a piece of land that's definitely not used. It's the end of a bowl court. It backs onto the train line. It's on a really big sloping, it's a sloping piece that you wouldn't put a playground on. You really just can't use it. Since we approved it last time, obviously there's been a lot more work that's been done in the airport rail link space. And for those tuning in at home, if you want to get onto the Moonee Valley website, you can pledge your support for that. But on a side note onto this, we did do our due diligence to say, well, would this land actually be more valuable if there was a train station in Airport West? and even with that, it is just not a really appropriate piece of land for council to be holding on to. The final dot point in it is that the money that we raise from the sale of this land will be going into the Open Space Reserve Fund. And we know that Airport West is crying out for usable open space. So I look forward to hopefully selling this land and then purchasing usable land in Airport West. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I always have a reservation about disposing or selling open space in our municipality with a growing population, and to me it seems like it should be something that we should hold on to at all cost. And I acknowledge Councillor Byrne's comments around the fact that this is not a particularly usable space. I certainly acknowledge that, and that we might, through sale proceeds, actually be able to purchase a site that is more appropriate and more central and better to be able to utilise by the people of Airport West. I still have reservations, and I just think, you know, we've got a significant amount of money sitting already in our open space reserve, that perhaps we should look at purchasing sites using that money rather than selling off land holdings that we have at this particular point in time. So I'm not necessarily convinced that we should go down this path, and it's, you know, obviously I had views that were different to most councillors when it came to selling off a parcel of land in Moonee Ponds. And more as I reflect on the importance of open space in inner municipalities, which is what we are, I just think that we should almost have a position that says do not dispose of land unless there is something extremely compelling to indicate that you should do so. Yeah, certainly heard what you've said around the usability, but I think we've got a pool of money there. We should be using that first to purchase those open space opportunities.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Would any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Cusack?
I think one of the more charming things that can happen in communities is the creation of pocket parks and places where people naturally go to recreate. So it might not necessarily be available space for everybody in the community. It might be, as time goes on, a space that is much cherished by the very local people who live there. And so I do take Councillor Marshall's comments very much to heart, because it's the small pocket handkerchief parks that have made something of our neighbourhoods, and thank goodness in a way not everything is nice square little blocks, and that these funny odd shaped places have popped up. So in one sense I have a lot of sympathy for it. I will probably, in my thinking, is I'm happy to bow to the wisdom of my fellow councillors who live in the area and work and connect with the people in the area around this. But my general counsel would be to support what Councillor Marshall is saying in this, is that you can't get it back in a hurry, and it might be, as I said, an opportunity foregone in the future that may have been of significant value for some people. We've already seen how people in Strathmore who have some significant access to parks and so on like that have fought tooth and nail to be able to get a little bit more here and there, and this little bit more with imagination and community use and so on like that could possibly turn into something a bit better than what it is. Might also save us the need to bring in all those services as well, or to apply maybe that cash in a different way. Anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Sypek, would you like to close?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Look, I totally agree with what Councillor Marshall said as well, but On this land, about the only thing you could probably put on there as a recreation thing would be the Arthur seat chairlift or a flying fox, because the undulation just doesn't cater for it. But I'm sure we can contact NASA and ask them to bring, when the Mars probe comes back, we can land it on top of here and get a couple of photos of it. Look, it's a slither of land that's highly unusable. And look, if it was flatter or if we had any other features that we could make into a pocket park, yes, totally agree, but it just doesn't cater for that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Slypek. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Slypek. Councillor Nation, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
All those against?
Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack.
Thank you. That's no one was for. I didn't put my hand up, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Sharp in the affirmative.
That motion is carried. Thank you. Agenda 10.9 is response to petitions, McPhail and Sherborne Streets traffic issues and Buckley Street level crossing notice of motions 2018-234 and 2017-12. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I'll just be not participating in this for reasons previously disclosed.
Thank you.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nation, thank you. Councillor Gauchi-Marici, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, please. It's on. The officer's recommendation is somewhat self-explanatory. We've received a number of petitions from residents in relation to the Buckley Street level crossing works, and there are a number of notices of motions that have been brought to council in relation to the Buckley Street level crossing issue, which this report addresses as well. For me, in particular, the petitions are evident of the number of residents who have contacted us with concerns about movements in local traffic and side streets. So for me, it's been 9 months now since we resolved not to pursue discovery, and that week it was commented that in not pursuing legal action, we would have traffic reports that week, which we are obviously still waiting on and have now been advised will not be provided. So I think for me, what's most disappointing about where we're at to be in this report, and I'm going to quote the report, is that without these reports, it is difficult to make an accurate assessment of the holistic impacts on the local road network. And I did say at the time, and I'll say again now, that no one could tell our community how they would be directly impacted. And we decided that we would be able to better work with government by not pursuing legal action, and that we would be able to mitigate concerns and resolve poor outcomes, but that is yet to happen. So instead, we now have staff who are literally cataloguing issues and concerns and problems. We have the community needing to petition us to have their concerns heard, which says volumes about the consultation during the project and about the stakeholder liaison group. We now have council doing our own traffic report and producing plans for how the concerns can be addressed, which is work that the LXRA should be doing themselves, should have listened to residents on and should have done already. But back to the report itself. The traffic counts show significant increases on Sherborne and McPhail, but also I want to note that these don't show the increases in large vehicles such as buses, which are making these situations even more dangerous for the community. And I also look forward to seeing the full traffic report so that we can see the impacts on streets who haven't petitioned us but are significantly impacted. There are streets like Levine who have more traffic down them than ever before, and obviously weren't captured in the report because it wasn't specifically mentioned in the petition. My greatest concern with all of these and the outstanding matters is that they'll be caught up in project completion stages and political cycles. I'm pleased we're no longer in caretaker mode. But without any guarantee to resolve and fund these concerns and mitigation measures, I have serious concerns that Council will be left to pick up the pieces of the poorly planned and executed project. I would really like to thank our officers for their work again. They do so much work on this that I would like to have thought that Alex or I should have done, and they're doing it, and we're so grateful for all of the work that your team does, Mr. Richardson. I would really like to thank the residents and traders and community for their petitions and for contacting us to try and seek improvements, because they are the ones who are living with this daily. And I just hope that it doesn't fall on deaf ears. I'd also just like to flag that the agreed mitigation measures are subject to consultation, so they certainly aren't done and dusted for if there are particular concerns. I look forward to seeing some slight improvements for the chaos that has been created down some of these streets. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gatchimerici. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak?
I will. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Gatchimerici and the petitioners for bringing this and ongoing issues to Council. I share a similar fear to Councillor Gatchimerici that now an election's been, a project's in essence ticked off, and local member and obviously the government's got another 4 years, that hopefully that's not the end of the work and advocacy and input from the state government on this particular site. And I say that because while they've completed the road underpass, people in a wheelchair still can't get on the train properly at Essendon Station. People in a wheelchair can't actually really access Essendon Station to much extent at all. We still possibly may lose 30 odd trees up the road at Glenbervie Station. And I know it's not in the precinct area, but you need to have a look at those planning controls that have been put over the whole site. There's still issues with pedestrian movements, there's issues with vehicle movements, as Councillor Gatchimerici alluded to. There's issues that residents and commuters and pedestrians and council officers and councillors flag every week that have come up since the underpass has opened. And it's important that we do stay on advocating for all of these issues to be ameliorated and fixed, and that we're not stuck with a financial burden, because you can look at a number of large-scale projects where councils, not just us, but other councils have been left to pick up the pieces. There's still the unknown of, and it's mentioned in the appendix of the IDO site at Essendon Station, how it ties in with election commitments, whether or not it does. And these are all things that were brought up throughout the actual project as being issues, either pro-project, anti-project by the LXRA or the state government or local members. So it's important that we as a council, on behalf of the residents and users and commuters and pedestrians and drivers, hold the LXRA and the state government to account to ensure that these deliverables do happen. Because if 180, 200 million, whatever's been spent on the project, still means that someone who's disabled in a wheelchair still can't get onto a train properly at Essendon Station, then priorities of this project are all wrong. And I hope that these cries don't fall on deaf ears, because that would be a horrible indictment to those that are responsible for this project.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Cusack?
Well, of course, I don't see this the same way as either Councillors Gatchimerici or Councillor Nation. However, The issue at heart here is about the continuing process by which council can raise matters and get fixes, and to continue to wind the clock back on the basis of the LXRA should have done this and all the rest of it is reasonable in some sense, but I don't think we need as a council to keep going through a history lesson. What we need is a plan and a plan that is actually active and proactive, and what we've got through this motion and the response to this motion is some work that is taking that forward. And the other part of this is that nobody can, as it also says in the report, there are time lags in the experience of some of these things that need to be addressed. The question of how people with disabilities and the likes of that access things is of course a significant concern, and one that is something that this council really needs to push. However, it's also a series of matters that around disability and access that need to be considered in total across this whole municipality. Many people can't get on trams. The train stations have very similar issues wherever you are on the line. It's not just an Essendon one, although I appreciate that Essendon will have its own idiosyncratic sort of things. But if you were in a wheelchair trying to get onto Newmarket Station, you'd have to be better than Duncan Fernley, I reckon. So there's a whole swag of issues there, hey? Gert Fernley, sorry. Thanks for the correction. But by the same token, the point is that all of our resources need to be, all of these assets that are belonging to the state government need to be continually looked at and are part of, I know some of the, again, I keep pointing to 2040, but it is a critical part of how we unfold and advocate towards getting these things addressed.
Any other? Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Baird?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I support this this motion, although I do, because I think that we should be advising and we should still continue our advocacy work to ensure that the surrounding areas are the best they possibly can be. But just to clarify a few things, particularly that Councillor Gauchimarici said, just so the public are aware, that whilst you brought up the streets that have had an increase in traffic, there's obviously been streets that have had a significant decrease in traffic, Leslie Road being one, from 3,400 traffic movements down to 1,400. I didn't realise that that was going to be the case before the numbers, so that's quite significant. It would be interesting to know from people who live on Leslie Road whether they've been able to tell the difference, or whether they thought that that was going to happen, because it wasn't something that had crossed my mind. And also in terms of not taking legal action in Feb at the start of the year, being able to work better with government to mitigate issues. Obviously it hasn't been a great process, I'm not denying that, but Gil's team, my understanding, has been working fortnightly at least with the LXRA, and there's probably a lot of minor things that have been improved that haven't necessarily come through the chamber, that if we had have decided to take the state government to court, I don't think we would have been having fortnightly meetings with the LXRA. So I think there's pros and cons. I'm sure that it'll be something that will be talked about by members of the community and wider community for many, many years as to whether or not it was the right decision, but we're elected to make hard decisions, and that's what we did on that night. But yes, in terms of what the actual motion is today, in terms of letting the petitioners know and continuing advocacy and pushing for improvements, I've got no issues with that, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? close? Councillor Gatchamuchi?
Just briefly, certainly the working with government was in no way a reflection on our team who have worked incredibly hard. The conversation is more, and Councillor Nation alluded to it, about a number of commitments that were made during discussion stages about greenery, about disabled access, about crossings that are still yet to be delivered, are still yet to have funding committed. And I am very, very concerned that those will not eventuate. And it's not in any way trying to be a history lesson. My concern is that the project was done at such a haste to be opened before a state election that had they just hit pause and done a little more consultation and spent a little bit more time speaking to the community and actually providing impact assessments and reviewing them, that some of these concerns could have been mitigated earlier. And it still may well have been a road under solution, but it would have had less impact on some of the community. So,
thank you, Councillor. I shall now put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sypek, Councillor Nation, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gatchamuchi. Unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you. The next item is 10.10. Sorry, Councillor Marshall. Thank you, Councillor Byrne. The next item is 10.10 and it is a report on assemblies of councillors. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sypek.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Gatchamuchi. Thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Sypek?
It speaks for itself.
Thank you. Councillor Gatchamuchi, would you like to speak? Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Byrne?
Just very quickly, just on the 7th of November, people who are reading the report might see that Councillor Sypek and I came to the meeting late at 17 and 18 minutes past 7. Just wanted to clarify that we were in a consultation meeting. We weren't just having a long dinner or anything.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? Okay, thank you. It's carried unanimously. Next item is business, councillors, is notice of motion, and we have one tonight. So I call on Councillor Nation to present his notice of motion entitled Immediate Consultation with Community Groups, Organisations and Stakeholders regarding Council's resolution to implement paid parking.
Thank you, Mayor. So I move that Council undertakes immediate consultation with community groups, organisations and stakeholders that may be unaware of the Council resolution on 11th of September 2018 to introduce paid parking at a number of sites within the municipality and subsequently may be negatively impacted by the introduction of paid parking, including but not limited to A. Moonee Ponds Bowling Club, potentially impacted by the introduction of 31 paid parking bays on Mount Alexander Road, Moonee Ponds, immediately north and south of the bowling club, and B. Maribyrnong Park Football Club and Maribyrnong Park St Mary's Cricket Club, potentially impacted by the introduction of 55 paid parking bays on the boulevard, Moonee Ponds, immediately southwest of Walsh Oval / Maribyrnong Park.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Marshall. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Nation?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor. So this notice of motion I'm bringing before Council tonight is in response to an existing Council resolution moved by yourself on the 11th of September to implement paid parking at specific locations within the municipality. Even though I voted against the resolution, I do acknowledge that it was passed and that despite my own opposition to introducing paid parking, I do respect Council's decision. That said, there are a number of anomalies in the sites identified to introduce paid parking, namely the two sites listed in my notice of motion, being the proposed 31 paid parking bays on Mount Alexander Road, Moonee Ponds, immediately north and south of Moonee Ponds Bowling Club, and the proposed 55 paid parking bays on the boulevard, Moonee Ponds, immediately southwest of Walsh Oval and Maribyrnong Park. Now, the problem with these two sites is they potentially don't align with the purpose of implementing paid parking, which, as written at the top of the previous report to Council, was, quote, to implement paid parking at specific locations within the municipality through small-scale projects at the centre of the overloading, close quote. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to state whether or not these sites were identified in Council's Philip Boyle and Associates review of potential appropriate sites to implement paid parking, because I don't think that document has been released to the public and it wasn't part of the appendix when it came before Council, so I won't comment on that. However, in the actual report that came before Council, there was a distinct lack of data, including vehicle counts, usage percentages for these sites, a lot of the stuff that we use in our day-to-day parking hierarchy that's part of the municipal parking strategy, and the fact they don't fall inside an activity centre and are not under great stress from commuter parking. And that further highlights why, in my opinion, these two sites are particular anomalies. So the notice of motion before us asks for Council to consult with the 3 sporting clubs that are going to be heavily impacted by the implementation of paid parking at these 2 sites. And I do this and raise it noting that particularly for the site at the Boulevard, the justification of implementing paid parking at this site, as outlined in the original report, was because parking in that area, quote, is under stress, close quote, during sporting events. Sorry, that should have all been a quote, is under stress during sporting events, close quote. It's worth noting that the majority of these sporting events at the site are junior sporting events. So while the implementation of paid parking aligns with transport objectives identified in MV 2040, I feel that through this consultation, we may also discover that it will have a negative impact on clubs and organisations that will play a vital role in actually helping us shape the 2040 community. And that's especially when the recommendation is to apply paid parking at these sites from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m, 7 days a week. In the original report that came before Council under the header of consultation, it stated, quote, signage will be placed at the locations to notify people of the intention to introduce paid parking, including the cost and time limits, close quote. There was no reference throughout the entire report that acknowledged there were clubs and organisations located at these sites that may be impacted. So I think we can do better than this, and given we are an organisation that prides itself on consulting the community, just putting up some signs to notify people, users and organisations after the fact isn't, in my opinion, good enough. And so while I note the officer's comments beneath my notice of motion on the meeting papers state there will be forthcoming consultation, given the wording of the original report, which doesn't state this, particularly under the heading of consultation, I'll feel a lot more comfortable if this proposed consultation is there in writing as a resolution of Council. So hopefully fellow councillors will see the importance of properly notifying clubs and organisations that may be potentially impacted by the introduction of paid parking. And if not, I do remind the community that the report that was moved on the 11th of September to implement paid parking does specifically say that, quote, should significant negative responses, 20 plus in brackets, be received in response to any of the specific proposals, a report will be brought back to Council to seek further guidance on the continuation of paid parking at the specific locations.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to speak in support of the motion, noting that, like Councillor Nation, I didn't support the original motion to introduce paid parking, and Councillor Nation has touched on some of the reasons why. Certainly one of my concerns was around the arbitrariness of the selected sites, and particularly these 2. Again, you think about the potential impact and the inconsistencies with our attempts to try and get people more active, and you really, I've had people ask me about how were these sites chosen, and it's very difficult to provide a good rationale. I think it wasn't helped probably in the council debate that there were inconsistent versions as to why this was being introduced. Is it revenue raising? Is it to try and get parking turnover? If it's to try and get parking turnover, will the pricing actually affect that? And I think that was the concern, that the report just had too many unanswered questions and the lack of a clear strategic basis on which to go down the path at this point in time. The consultation, it really is important. And I mean, there are other groups, and I know you've got it, but not limited to, so I know that is obviously intended to be a sample of the groups that will need to be consulted. But again, you think there's the anglers, there's the rowing club, a range of other users in the precinct who will potentially be impacted. There are the parents using playgrounds. There are a whole range of people who are in and around this particular precinct, around the boulevard, who may be impacted by this proposal. So we will need to be very clear about who we consult with. Certainly in non-Moonee parts of the world, we have other user groups that may be affected, and I would certainly expect that the users of Cross Keys will also be consulted as part of this process. So while I don't support the introduction of paid parking, and certainly not on the basis that was proposed as part of the report previously considered, I absolutely support the idea that we should at least be consulting. And as Councillor Nation has said, the report makes it clear about what will happen if there is significant community pushback in relation to this proposal. So if people have concerns, they know what to do.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Gacci-Murici.
Madam Mayor, with the endorsement of the mover and seconder, I was hoping to add a point C amendment, please.
I'll just check whether it has to be a formal amendment.
Would you like?
It will need to be a formal amendment with a separate seconder.
Would you like to know what the amendment is?
Yes, please.
I was hoping for point C to say sporting and community group users of Cross Keys Reserve, bracket potentially impacted by the introduction of 29 paid parking bays on Woodland Street, Essendon, close bracket.
Have we got that?
Chair, can I just ask a point of clarification why this, as opposed to earlier in the meeting, would be considered a formal amendment given the actual motion states including but not limited to, and even before that references community groups, organisations and stakeholders. So the A and B are just merely examples of who we would consult. So I can't see how the addition of one of the others, where there's already paid parking that's proposed there, would in any way actually change the nature of the motion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there is no provision other than via a formal amendment to make changes to the motion that's up on the screen. Obviously, you might raise a point of clarification from Councillor Gacci-Murici as to the necessity of the proposed change. But in regards to process, it needs to be a formal amendment.
Sorry, just a point of clarification again. 10.3, civic naming policy, that wasn't a formal amendment.
The conduct in regards to the debate around the civic naming policy was somewhat problematic, because I think we did move from a point of clarification to sliding into what was actually an amendment. So that should have been probably dealt with under our policy as a formal amendment. However, because there was quite a lot of clarification required on that item, that was the way that debate was conducted.
So, a further point of clarification, we are inconsistently applying our meeting procedures in regards to formal amendments at this meeting.
We have in this instance, and we have in other meetings as well, yes.
Oh dear.
Do I have a seconder if it's formal? Could you please read out your point C? I've got sporting and community group users of Cross Keys Reserve.
Bracket potentially impacted by the introduction of 29 parking bays at Woodland Street, Essendon.
Interesting
Well,
motion.
perhaps, Mayor, as a point of clarification,
yes,
I just wondered if rather than have to go through a formal amendment process, that it would be read into the but not limited to, that it would include Cross Keys. I mean, it's been expressed in debate, so that would save having to go through a formal amendment process.
Madam Mayor, point of order. I think we've got a motion up there with an amendment, so I think we just go with...
Sorry, my point of clarification.
I think the point of clarification Councillor Marshall is making is just to take the motion as read rather than have an addition to the motion.
Yes, because it's but not limited to, and I think it's understood. Yeah.
Yes, but I do have a councillor who has put up the flagging of point C, so I guess if there is no seconder for that, effectively it goes back to the original motion, which is including but not limited to.
I'll second that.
So.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Councillor Sypek seconds Councillor Gatchi-Marici's amendment. So, Councillor, we have a mover and a seconder then for that. So, Councillor Gatchi-Marici, would you like to speak to that amendment?
I think it's self-explanatory, just that there are sporting and community groups at Cross Keys that I would like specified in the same way that the Moonee ones are specified.
Thank you, Councillor Gatchi-Marici. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words about this. I'm in favour of this motion and the Councillor Gouch's motion on it as well, but I do have quite a big concern about this. It's about the immediate consultation and the immediate introduction.
Sorry, point of clarification, are we debating the amendment or the motion?
The amendment.
I'm lost
The amendment,
now.
Councillor Sypek.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nation.
I'm just concerned about the haste in all this, the immediate consultation, the immediate implementation of parking meters. And the problem is we're coming up to...
Councillor Sypek, we just have to, at the moment, focus on the formal amendment, which relates basically to Cross Keys. Because it's gone to a formal amendment process,
Yeah,
which is
and
point
Cross
C.
Keys is going to have immediate consultation as well, isn't it?
Well, yes, it can be read
so,
into that. Yes.
So I'm raising concerns about the immediate consultation. Because we're coming up to Christmas, I don't think we're going to get the right people, or we're probably not going to get enough...
February. Officers' comments say Feb.
Pardon?
Officers' comments say Feb.
Sorry, I don't understand what you said.
Oh, sorry.
Can we please just continue, please, Councillor Sypek?
Once again, I'm concerned that it's coming up to Christmas, and why is it being pushed in haste before Christmas when the officers will be doing their consultation in February, when everyone will probably be back from holidays, and will probably get a far better and a broader response to these consultations. The immediacy of this is really concerning for me, because I don't think anyone's going to be around for Christmas. I mean, half us councillors are leaving on holidays. So
We just have a point of clarification, because Councillor Sypek has raised an important point, and I would be thinking that the date would be February for the consultation, that you weren't proposing an earlier consultation date. I just want to be clear on that.
But the word immediate means like tomorrow.
Well, I guess I'll get a point of clarification from Ms. Reiter, if I may, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Officers had taken immediate, and our intention was to send out letters to affected stakeholders notifying that we would be undertaking the consultation, a consultation process through February, so councillors can determine whether they would like those letters sent out or not.
Thank you. Continue, Councillor Sypek.
So I'm confused now. So are we going to have consultation in February or now?
Based on point of clarification, immediately means now.
So we're going to be having immediate consultation for the introduction of paid parking straight away?
Yes.
Before Christmas?
Yes, that's what immediate
Well,
means.
that concerns me again, because I think, why are we rushing into bringing paid parking straight away? Why can't we?
Sorry, point of clarification, John.
Please,
Is
councillors.
your immediacy concern just in relation to Cross Keys amendment, or is it to all of them?
To all of them, because...
Can we vote on the amendment
even
first?
Cross
Can
Keys.
we not continue to talk across the table, please? Councillor Sypek has the floor.
Well, yeah, all I'm saying is why the haste, why the push, why the rush? Why can't we just leave it till February, where the officers had planned for consultation?
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Would any other councillor like to speak to that item? Councillor Nation?
I will speak to the amendment, and in doing so will reference points raised when speaking to the amendment by Councillor Sypek, so I don't think it is out of line. The reference to immediacy is quite simple in terms of tomorrow the Chief Executive Officer writing a letter to Moonee Ponds Bowling Club, Maribyrnong Park Football Club, Maribyrnong Park St Mary's Cricket Club, which was in the original notice of motion, to say, did you know you are going to have 31 paid parking bays straight out the front of your club? Or did you know there is going to be 55 paid parking bays? Consultation with these community groups, organisations and stakeholders does not mean we are putting out a survey in Valley View. It means actually making these organisations aware of what is occurring, because since the 11th of September, that doesn't appear to have happened, and they are completely unaware of what's going to happen. So in terms of acting with haste, I think given the motion was from the 11th of September, we are not acting in haste. We are trying to catch up, because it is going to be almost over 2 months now, and these clubs haven't been notified. So I ask people to read the motion and to actually understand what it is about, who we're trying to contact, noting that sporting clubs do themselves have to convene, discuss and form a particular opinion based on their committee or management committee. So that will give them sufficient time, if we notify them tomorrow, over a couple of months, what have you, to come back to us with a position on behalf of their organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Would any other councillor wish to speak?
If we're going to notify them, so then why are we having immediate consultation? Should we have immediate notification rather than consultation?
What's the point of order?
I think it's we have to take the notice of motion as it reads. I would advise Councillor Sypek, which is immediate.
Point of order on me though?
No.
I think we call a point of order about the rules of debate not being followed, so I'm just worried. Was that point of order on me because I was the last to speak?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, you said point of order.
That's right. You said, so I thought you were calling on me being the last person to speak. Two very different things.
Any other councillor wish to speak to this item?
Sorry, did you get your point of clarification answered?
Not really.
I answered the point of clarification. Can any other councillor wish to speak to the item? Councillor Cusack?
Well, I want to drag us back to the amendment, which is pretty straightforward. I don't have a great deal of trouble about putting in cross keys, but please note that I suppose that the actual motion itself has a universal factor in it, and it's not just saying that it's only in relation to those two areas. It's not limited to just those areas, is what it says. So, in one sense, let's be sensible about this. We're wasting time and energy talking about point C, which is already covered in the original motion. But if you want to have it in, I'm not going to object to it, Councillor Gauci-Marucci, but it kind of just doesn't make one iota of difference, frankly, because we could be talking about every place that has got nominated for paid parking.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Was there any other councillor wish to speak to this amendment? Councillor Marshall?
Look, at one level, I'm happy to include it, but then Councillor Cusack has raised my concern, which is by failing to include others, I don't want this to be a situation where we don't, we either list them all or we don't, sorry, I'm turning my mic on and off, that groups are overlooked because we haven't specifically identified them. So again, I don't know whether we need to include, flag a potential further amendment to list other groups, particularly the Essendon Anglers, the Essendon Rowing Club, the Maribyrnong Park Bowls Club, and also users, and I don't know how we would do this, of the playgrounds at Queen's Park and also at Maribyrnong, down near Maribyrnong Park, because we need to be clear. As I said, my concern is now because the more we list, that almost it will be viewed that, well, you didn't talk about those ones, so they weren't meant to be included. So,
And what about the ones in Rosehill? Like
Please don't interrupt
Avenue?
councillors while they're speaking, please.
so can I? So that was my debate contribution on this particular amendment, but would like to foreshadow a further amendment to include other groups.
Foreshadowing this an amendment if this does not get up.
So either, just foreshadowing, yeah.
Okay, we've got a foreshadowing. Okay. So any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Okay, there is no right of reply for the mover of the amendment, so I shall put the amendment to the vote, which is point C. All those for point C? That is carried unanimously. Now we go back to the original motion, including point C. So we have, does any other councillor wish to speak to that original motion, please?
I move, Mayor, an amendment to the original motion.
You have already spoken, Councillor Marshall.
It's to the original motion, so not as to a proposed amendment.
A further amendment?
Yeah, to list the additional groups. And if anyone has any other groups, I'm happy to include them now.
Okay, Councillor Marshall, what will be your further amendment?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to have at point D, which is the Essendon Anglers, Essendon Rowing Club, Maribyrnong Park Bowls Club, and users of the playgrounds at Queen's Park and the Boulevard Playground. I think everyone knows what it means. Oh, the incinerator?
The new croquet club up on Maribyrnong Park.
Yep.
And the tennis club.
Why don't we just list, why don't you just say and all the other proposed sites?
Well, that's what
you moved. You seconded the amendment.
Maribyrnong Park Bowls Club.
There's now a croquet club.
Yep.
The incinerator theatre.
This is getting out of hand, councillors.
We had it Universal.
Exactly, we should have just left it universal.
And I wanted it to
But not limited to.
Yeah. Yep, users of the playgrounds at...
Because you put everything else in, not the numbers.
Can we continue just having Councillor Marshall with the floor, please?
Organisations that have.
Can we? Councillor Marshall's got the floor. Sorry. It's Councillor Marshall's formal amendment. So.
And Boulevard user and the Boulevard. The incinerator. Incinerator gallery. Don't you hate having to type what people are watching? The traders associations. Did I miss anyone?
Aberfeldy Park Cricket Club, the Northern Obedience Dog Club.
Aberfeldy Park Cricket Club. The athletics. Essendon Athletics. They park, yeah.
Should have put but not limited to involved.
Yeah, but. Athletics users.
The boot camps, the people who actually have arrangements with the council to use the facilities.
Councillors, just something's been brought to my attention that an original motion, an amendment cannot be moved by an original proposer or seconder. So can I propose potentially, Councillor Cusack, that you would like to, rather than Councillor Marshall? Well, Councillor Marshall technically can't move this
I've just moved,
foreshadow
it's on the floor,
motion.
though, that's the problem. I've moved it. So what do we do? It's on the floor.
Like the meeting procedures that were ignored in 10.3.
I reckon we just defer this and get better clarification to the next meeting, because this is just.
Discuss it again.
I've got no idea what we're actually voting for now.
Again.
Well, we've got the issue with the second not being able to move this. I'm just dealing with this issue at the moment. The seconder is unable to move this motion because it was seconded. The councillor seconded the original motion. So,
It is on the floor.
Take it.
Through you,
well,
Madam Mayor.
everyone's so strict with the meeting procedures. Well, you know.
And 10.3 wasn't council side fix. Just not sure when we follow and when we don't.
Am I allowed to?
I'm not move another amendment.
Am I allowed to move the one that was on the floor?
I'm not sure.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Gauci-Marici, you could move this, and it would need to be seconded by councillors other than the mover and the seconder of the original motion.
Which I have no issue with, but the problem is I've moved a motion which is on the floor, so I just want to don't leave it sitting there. No, that's all right, but we just need to not just leave it sitting out there in the ether.
When I took your foreshadowing, I was thinking to myself, because you seconded the first motion.
Yeah, sorry, I foreshadowed then moved, but yep.
Yeah, no, when you first foreshadowed, I was thinking you're unable to foreshadow, but I didn't have that clarified because we were in the midst of another debate, so my apologies with that. I'll take responsibility for that mistake with the meeting procedures. So if Councillor Gauci-Marici would like to move this rather than Councillor Marshall, at least we are in absolutely consistent with the meeting procedures. And I can assure you that I will keep in line with the meeting procedures 100% in the future. So there will be no flexibility. Just letting you all know, that's the way it will be played. So Councillor Gauci-Marici, would you like to move what has already been started by Councillor Marshall?
I'm happy to move Councillor Marshall's suggestion with any other community group and be done. Sorry, Mike.
So we're leaving it at D?
And E, any other community group. Just so there's no one else we've possibly forgotten about who feels omitted, excluded or otherwise potentially impacted. Do the mover and the seconder
You've
accept
moved.
the amendment?
No, you've moved. You've moved the further amendments. So I need a seconder for that further amendment. Do I have a seconder for that point, those points D and E?
Come on, councillors.
I
I can't either, no. So
Think it has to lapse.
Oh, I was going to say that, so we
just vote on it. Let's not discuss.
Councillor Cusack? Councillor Gauci-Marici, would you like to speak to that amendment?
No, but noting I'm yet to speak to the original motion, which I intend to.
Yeah, Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to that, the alternative, the formal amendment?
No.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor. I suppose what this has highlighted is the significant number of potential users that will be impacted by this decision. And so I think it's been a useful, although quite excruciating in some ways, exercise to go through and actually think about the potential impacts. So I'm happy to support the addition, and I'm really mindful that, particularly with something like this, that groups can feel overlooked. So that's why I think we probably needed to take one tack or the other and either list or not list. So I think it's probably worthwhile, having gone down the path of adding the Cross Keys user groups, that we go down and add the additional groups that Councillor Gauci-Marici has put up there.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor? Councillor Byrne?
I just think this whole thing's just getting a bit absurd and ridiculous. When you look at where the parking bays are, like for people, like they would have already run their athletics event. They would have run their 1,500 metres where the parking is due to be. Like I'm not sure how far out we're consulting. I understand we want to sort of cover everyone, but I can just imagine what it's going to be like when these clubs get a note at the start of December saying, oh, we're going to put in parking meters when everyone goes on holidays. But I understand that I'm speaking to the amendment, but I just think, I don't know, it would almost be better to put up signs where they're going to be, because saying that some of the things that have been added in, I think, is just going a bit above and beyond, a bit crazy. You know, it was covered, in the initial motion, which said including but not limited to, and I can understand the main user groups of Cross Keys initially being included as an amendment, but as for all the others, I just think it's getting a little bit out of hand. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Nation?
I will speak to the amendment. Can we please scroll to the amendment that's on the floor? Thank you. And important to note that consultation, by definition, is formal discussions. So commencing formal discussions with these clubs involves writing them a letter to make them aware of a resolution of council that's over 2 months old. I think that is doable, and that Christmas doesn't prevent council from writing a letter to Essendon Anglers, Essendon Rowing Club, Maribyrnong Park Bowls Club, noting that user groups are harder to consult with, but in actual, as per the definition, I think we're overdue in starting formal discussions with these groups. Whether or not they're the ones particularly listed in the amendment that we're discussing are overly impacted, well, we'll let them tell us. But in terms of this amendment, while the original motion did state including but not limited to, for the case of for the purpose of specifics, to ensure that there's directive to the executive to write a letter to these sporting groups and these other groups, I have no problems with this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this?
Yes, Councillor. I would like to.
Councillor Sypek?
Once again, I'm flabbergasted by what we're doing here. Consultation means consulting with the community. Consultation means speaking to people. Notifying someone means writing a letter. Now, if we want to notify them and send them a letter before Christmas, well then put up notifying these clubs, not consulting. I think it's highly unlikely that we can consult with the park users before Christmas. And I'm saying, why is the rush? What is the push to get parking meters in here? Leave it till after Christmas. The officers have got a plan in February. Why don't we just let the officers do what they're supposed to do, instead of trying to mishmash this and trying to get some kind of, I don't know, notification, consultation, whatever you want to call it, writing a letter. Consultation means speaking to a lot of people, not writing one letter.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Any other councillor wish to speak? I think everybody has spoken. So there is no right to reply to an amendment, so I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici.
All those against?
Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Byrne.
That is carried. So now we shall move back to the original motion, which is on the screen there. And any other councillor that did not speak earlier wish to speak to the original motion? Councillor Gatchin-Ritchie.
Surprising it is, because I have seemed to have spoken a lot. I have not spoken to the original motion. I am supportive of paid parking in the whole of where we considered it originally several months ago was small pockets along our trading strips, around congestion around our stations. It was not the entire strips of parks, it was sections. And that is why point C originally, before I got into moving point D, point C was about the sporting and community groups, not about the broader commuters who may use those paid parking bays at Strathmore. So for me, I'm more than happy for us to consult, notify, or anything in between our sporting and community groups at all of the paid parking bay locations. I am mindful that we made a decision to assist with turnover in some areas or to reduce the amount of parking at train stations in some areas so it could be used by community groups. And this, I'm sure, will all be covered in the report when it comes back to us about feedback and where things are at, that some of the areas considered are inherently different to each other and maybe need to be considered differently. But certainly when it comes to the small pockets of sections in our trading strips, or the areas alongside our train stations, I am supportive of paid parking. So,
thank you, councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak to councillor Cusack?
Well, there's a lot of logic in the motion, and I'm more than happy for a process of consultation to occur and information to be given to the clubs and all those major users who are affected by the parking. But I'm also conscious of the fact, and I somewhat agree with Councillor Gatchin-Ritchie, that this should not be viewed as a either or throw the baby out with the bathwater routine. There are many examples across the whole of Melbourne where people use public amenity and pay for parking. Have you ever been along the Bayside on a hot sunny day and tried to get a park in around Port Melbourne and not pay for it? Simple question. Fairfield Boathouse, you've got to pay for your parking around there. And I, as a bowler, I play against Fitzroy Melbourne on a regular basis, and there's no way at the top end of St George's Road you're going to get free parking. So there's common sense in all of this. Now, if the consultation is about a genuine conversation about how does paid parking work in a neighbourhood, I'm more than happy about that. But if this is a Trojan horse to throw out paid parking in these areas, I'm very concerned about it, because clearly in the long term, these areas are under massive stress for parking. Now, you can adjust the hours. They don't have to be, these 7 days a week, 6 till 10. They can be manufactured around either business hours or other times when there's not so busy times and so on like that. And I would have thought that the consultation would work that way. If vested interests like a bowls club at Moonee Ponds turns around and sort of says, we don't want it at all, and that's the only consultation you're going to get out of us, and that's the limit of it, it's going to be very, very difficult to go any other way. But on the other side of it, there is clearly, if we're talking about how parking gets shared and used in that neighbourhood, a common sense approach down the track, and the timing for implementation for parking and all that sort of stuff can be made, the timing about when it might be implemented can all be negotiated. But the reality is that we shouldn't be, as I said, using it to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So when we voted on paid parking on the 11th of September, there was a variety of different types of parking that we looked at. We looked at some on Matthews Avenue and some Treadwell, which Matthews Avenue we thought were used more for tram users, Treadwell for people potentially just wanting to run in and hopefully be able to utilise that turnover. We looked at certain areas around sporting fields, around, I suppose, on Mount Alexander Road, where there's that interface between a busy road, a traders precinct, and the bowls club and whatnot. And you know, basically they were areas spread across the municipality for us to go ahead with a trial. And since then, there's obviously been a lot of angst in regards to certain areas. Personally, myself, as a Rosehill Ward councillor, I've had queries in regards to the one on Treadwell and Matthews Avenue, people not being particularly clear, but once explained, it's been okay. A lot of people are just dead set against paid parking, no matter what. It's similar to what Councillor Cusack was alluding to. But I was a little bit surprised when I saw this notice of motion, that, as Councillor Sypek has brought up, it does say consultation, considering one of the big things that we were critical of the state government on with the Buckley Street level crossing was the poor consultation that happened. If we are to undertake immediate consultation now, and I do understand your explanation of it before, Councillor Nation, but I would have preferred it to have been just notification before Christmas and then the consultation in February. But as Councillor Cusack said, what's the consultation going to say? Is it just going to say we don't want parking meters? Well, that's not necessarily what we wanted. What I would have preferred was, I've never really been in favour of the parking meters along the boulevard. I would be happy for them just to be scrapped completely. We can see by how many users they are, but my understanding was from general conversation from lots of people and pretty much what was brought up in the chamber before was that there is a parking problem down there. So if there is a parking problem, you know, we're giving something a trial and doing something about it. As the person who holds the leisure and active communities portfolio, that one didn't sit right with me, but if it was sort of something that would help ease traffic congestion around the area, then I would have been okay to scrap that one completely. In terms of the Moonee Ponds Bowls Club, the one on Mount Alexander Road, maybe potentially looking at capping the amount of spots that are potentially going to go out would have been a better one. But again, it's only a trial. We haven't done paid parking before, but there are issues. So I'm not sure whether a foreshadowed motion, if we can have foreshadowed motions on notices of motion. If I could ask that as a point of clarification.
This is a formal amendment, so...
No, I wouldn't be doing no, it would be a foreshadowed, an alternative.
If this fails?
If this fails.
Foreshadowed amendment.
Yes. No, a foreshadowed motion if this motion fails. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can. And I can't do it.
Can I just ask...
I'll receive clarification on that.
You might, Councillor, were this to fail, consider following the process for advising in regards to a notice of motion at a future meeting.
Okay, just as a further point of clarification, so I'm assuming then there's no way that I can, as the motion stands, it would be too big an amendment just to pull the paid parking from the Maribyrnong River precinct. Would that?
No, you cannot
from
do
the
that
trial?
for this motion, no.
Apologies, Councillor Byrne, I'm not clear what you're asking.
To rescind, I think, part of a council motion.
Are you suggesting rescission of a council decision?
Well, part of the council decision from the trial. No?
I think that would be quite substantially in opposition to the council decision and would probably translate as a part rescission. So.
Okay. But
The motion's been enacted, so it can't be rescinded.
Can I just ask a point of clarification, because there's been a couple of things that have made me a bit concerned. I mean, to me, consultation is not having one conversation. It's the start of a conversation. So I want to make that clear, because that's my understanding, is that there will be a series of conversations, and we won't just go, oh, this is what's happening, and that's it.
Point of clarification question?
So it is, yeah.
Yes, Councillor, Ms Reid.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, the intention in February was to start a range of conversations with the community. Officers are always concerned about commencing consultation prior to Christmas, because we often get criticised
Could I ask a point of clarification as well and ask a question? What's the likelihood of you doing a full consultation before Christmas with all the park users?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, the notification of sporting clubs and other organisations that have an address that we can write to is reasonably straightforward, and we could expedite that immediately. Park users and other groups are much more challenging to communicate with, naturally, particularly over the Christmas period.
But what's the likelihood of you consulting with park users?
I think Ms Reid has answered that.
So there's no likelihood of consulting before Christmas?
No, she did just answer that.
Through Mayor, it would be very challenging to be able to do that.
Sorry, point of clarification, I just heard two different things then. So through the chair, that you stated it was challenging, but in terms of clubs that are outlined in A and B, starting consultation by notifying them of what's occurring before Christmas is a reasonable course of action.
I think Ms Reid said it was straightforward.
Yes, that's reasonably straightforward.
Contact.
Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak to this item?
Yeah,
Councillor Sypek?
Yeah. Once again, we're only going to consult and talk to certain people.
Can I speak to the amendment?
So can I speak
Yes,
without
have
being
the floor,
interrupted? This is the
please.
fourth
Yes,
time
please.
that I've tried to speak, and every time I get interrupted. Once again, we are only going to consult with certain groups and other park users. We're just not going to disregard them, not worry about them, and we're going to hastily introduce consultation and hastily introduce parking meters, all before Christmas. I'm sorry. Madam Mayor, can I please speak?
Yes, you can. Can councillors please respect other councillors when they're speaking?
Point of order. The facts.
Councillor Nation, can you please let councillor speak?
I call a point of order.
Point of order on what is your point of order on?
The specific facts that Councillor Sypek has outlined in terms of implementing.
What's the reference? Councillor conduct?
Specific
meeting
facts
procedure?
are incorrect. Clause 2B.
Specific facts are
So
incorrect.
can I say my point of order? So my point of order under clause 2.B of the Council Code of Conduct is that the councillor is making a claim the specific facts of are incorrect by stating parking meters will be implemented before Christmas.
Well, it says here, immediate consultation and impact by the introduction of paid parking, including. The introduction of paid parking. What does that mean? We're going to introduce it 3 years down the track? Immediate consultation means right now, before Christmas.
Okay.
If it's immediate notification, different story, but consultation. And once again, I'd like to finish something that I started speaking without being interrupted. We are only going to consult with certain groups, and other park users, like Natalie said, will be hard to get to. Why the rush? Why the push before Christmas? Leave it till February when the officers have got plenty of time, where everyone will be back and we can consult with everyone, not just certain specific groups and get only certain answers.
Thank you, councillor Sypek. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I think everyone's spoken. I might just quickly just make note of the work that our officers have done already on this, and from my understanding, not even all of the actual car spots in the location specified have been earmarked, which is why the officers, I believe, are working on it behind the scenes. So it may have been, we may have endorsed it a month and a half ago in council chambers, but I don't believe that we have everything, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed regarding where these actual spots are going to go. So my understanding was that we were going to go out, officers were going to go out in February, which is what there is a note on the notice of motion regarding this. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm quite sure that the officers are quite aware of every single user at every single one of these locations. And to have to spell it out like this on a motion in front of us, I am baffled that we get to these points sometimes in these council meetings because, you know, in some circumstances, the officers know more than us, I can assure you of that, especially in regards to users of these parks and users of these areas. So that's really all I need to say about this. I shall put that, and I shall put that, yes, you can close, Councillor. There is no right of reply because an amendment has been moved. So I shall now put that to the vote. All those in favour of this motion?
Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
All those against?
Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp.
That is carried. The next item of business is urgent business, and I do not. Or do we have any items of urgent business?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to bring up some urgent business. As we've just had a state election, I think it'd be pretty. Well, it'd be actually quite good if we could write through our advocacy strategy to write to the new Premier and the new government and all the local officials that have been elected in the area to congratulate them on their election win.
I'm not sure that's urgent business, Councillor Sypek. That's something that's pretty much procedural, and we do that. I've got letters ready to sign and go
Okay,
out.
Sorry, didn't know that. Thank you.
Councillors, do we have any delegate reports for your roles in your respective roles?
Mayor, I'm being cheeky here, I'm jumping in, but I think maybe for the people who might be viewing us tonight, there could be a question about why this council tonight is basically dressed in orange.
I'm doing that very shortly.
Very good.
Yes, I've got my little notes. Yes, done. The next item of business is confidential reports. So we shall move to that. But before we close this open meeting, thank you, Councillor Cusack. I was going to mention. No, there's none. What does it say there is? Oh, there are none. There are no confidential reports. Sorry, so I shall now move to close the meeting, but before I close, I would like to just thank the councillors, our CEO and executive team, who have all donned the colour orange tonight in support of Council's 16 days of activism to eliminate violence against women and girls. Please be sure to follow this campaign over the next 13 odd days. You may notice that whilst driving at night, our clock tower centre has turned orange, and you may also notice that we have our large orange banners flying high at our bigger roundabouts throughout the city. So these are just some of the ways that we can show support and commitment to this vital campaign, and we do hope that you get involved in some way, shape or form in your own personal lives. So thank you, members of the public gallery, and to those watching on live stream for your interest in the meeting tonight. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.